Welcome to Casual Politics. Peter Lilley, thank you very much for accepting my request, and I'm very grateful to you. You've been Member of Parliament from 1983, so, and now 32 years on, do you still want to carry on doing this job?
Well, certainly I shall carry on as long as I think I can contribute. I still enjoy it. I get a thrill coming into this place every day. And in a way, it's interesting being a backbencher. It's more varied than being a minister. Although, if they ask me to become Chancellor of the Exchequer tomorrow, I'll happily accept the job. But I think it's a bit unlikely.
and then people, they remember politicians for one thing that they do or they do say. For instance, Enoch Power, they will remember him for his Bloody Rivers speech in 1968, or John Knott when he stormed off the interview with Robin Day, or Michael Heseltine in the mid-70s when he was swinging the sword. And then they will remember you as well for your speech your famous speech in 1992. And do you regret that speech?
Well, no, I don't regret the speech. I obviously regret the spin that was put on it by people. I was trying to do two things when I became Secretary of State for Social Security, and I was advised by everybody just for a Tory to approach welfare reform is suicide. I thought, no, you've got to raise the public profile of the issue, and actually the public will be on your side. And though the BBC journalists made a lot about that speech, actually it was part of getting the public on my side. It was showing there was a really important issue we had to tackle in welfare, and I found in the subsequent 5 years it was the only area of policy under John Major where public support grew. Now it may have grown slightly faster if I'd worded that particular rhyme slightly differently, but it was part of saying we can't go on with public expenditure on welfare outstripping the economy year in, year out, as it has done for 50 years.
And in one of your interviews, you said that I'm not a troublemaker anymore, but I'm still a bastard. Is that right?
Yes, I think so. Well, you remember I was labelled a bastard by the Prime Minister.
In an interview with ITV. Were you surprised when he said that?
Yes, there'd been a disputed cabinet. I can't remember actually even now what the precise details were, but it was to do with Europe. 3 of us had objected to something that was proposed, and we'd been outgunned by the Prime Minister and the rest of the Cabinet. Somehow word of that had got out. The Prime Minister was being interviewed. After the interview was over, he didn't realise the camera was still running, the microphones were still recording, and the interviewer said to him, wouldn't you be better just getting rid of those 3 people in the Cabinet who objected to what you were doing? And he said, better to keep the bastards inside the tent pissing out rather than outside the tent pissing in. The interesting thing was the next day, more than 2 of my colleagues phoned up and said, we bastards must stick together. So it became a club people wanted to join.
And do you take any responsibility for bringing down John Major's government and to be part of that the 3 bastards?
Well, we didn't bring down the government. The electorate did.
You played a very big role to bring the government down because
it wasn't brought down.
No, because the leadership contest as well in 1995, which affected his premiership and his leadership.
Well, he chose to resign as a leader of the Conservative Party and have an election within the Conservative Party to confirm his position as Prime Minister, and I supported him, though I refused to make personal attacks on John Redwood, who was standing against him. So I was a somewhat qualified supporter.
Mm. And so do you think that he was a good Prime Minister, that people will remember him as a good Prime Minister?
They'll only remember him as a good man. He had an incredibly difficult hand to play as Prime Minister, both because he had a very small majority which disappeared as a result of by-elections in the course of the Parliament, but also because the Conservative Party was split down the middle on the issue of Europe, right through to the Cabinet. And he chose one of the two options of tackling this. One option would have been to say, this is what I want to do, I'm going to do it. If you don't like it, leave the cabinet, get on. He chose, and that would probably be Mrs. Thatcher's approach. His approach was to say, let's try and always try to get a consensus, and very collegiate within a cabinet, and trying to sort of square every circle, which made him appear weak. But probably, arguably the other approach would have both been that of a stronger leader and would have worked, but it might of course have failed, in which case the government would have fallen, and who knows what would have happened in the interim. I certainly considered at one stage, should I, on the Maastricht Treaty, resign? And a number of junior ministers came to me and said, urged me to do so, and said if they did, I would follow. But I thought, supposing I do resign, that would exempt me from responsibility of aspects of the Maastricht Treaty I didn't like. But if others followed me, the government would fall. Mm-hmm. If it fell, there'd have to be a general election, and probably John Smith would become Prime Minister. And instead of having a Maastricht Treaty which exempted us from becoming part of the single currency, he would have signed up to the single currency. So if I was to resign, I'd have to stop other people following me. And I didn't see how I could stand up and say, I want to resign, but don't anyone else do it. So I thought that's an incoherent position. Either I have to soldier on as member of a government, doing some things I don't like, but actually getting us a better Maastricht Treaty than the Labour Party would have negotiated. So I stayed on. And your original question was, do I think John Major is a good Prime Minister will be remembered as such? He'll be remembered, I think, as a skillful Prime Minister who handled a very difficult situation, probably as well as it could be handled.
And Maastricht Treaty, was it a big mistake that the government signed up to it?
There was a stage when it could have avoided it. At the early stage of when it was being negotiated, each cabinet minister was given an idea of what the early stages, the likely elements of the treaty might be, the things that the Commission and other countries were demanding, and we were told to put them into three categories. Things which we positively wanted, things which we don't particularly want but could cope with if it was necessary, and category C, things we didn't want to do. And each cabinet minister had to go off and say, as far as his departmental area, put all the items into those three categories. An interesting thing was not a single member of the cabinet, including all the cabinet enthusiasts for European Union like Heseltine and Clark and so on, not a single came back with any items we actually wanted in the treaty. There were things we could cope with and things we just couldn't cope with. And we went around the table and everybody reported everything was in the latter two categories. There was nothing we wanted. Said to the Prime Minister, if there's nothing we want in this treaty, should we not be negotiating for failure? We should be trying to succeed, to bring about failure to agree on a treaty. And actually, to my surprise, but I think to his credit, or certainly it tells you the good nature, why I say he's a good man, his reply was, that would be dishonourable. It would be dishonourable to enter negotiations if your aim was to disrupt it. I'm not quite sure that's true.
But he got some changes, maybe on
but we got a treaty which excluded the worst things. But by definition, it had nothing we actually wanted it. So it would be better to have no treaty. Whether that would have been possible, other than just by saying, well, we don't want a treaty, we're going to veto everything. That would have been, say, honourable, but made us unpopular with those who wanted to go ahead. Anyways, we at least got an exemption from the single currency, and that's been an enormous relief, and we would be in dire straits, and so would the whole of Europe if we'd been inside the single currency.
And what do you make of David Cameron's renegotiation with his counterparts? You said that if he can renegotiate successfully, you will vote for Britain to stay in. Is that right?
Yes, if he can. I think it would be extremely difficult for him to get substantive changes that would make it worthwhile. But the key, in my view, is to establish the precedent that powers can come back from the European Union institutions to the member states.
Yeah.
So far there's no precedent for that, and there's a sort of doctrine that's become accepted called the doctrine of the acquis communautaire, that when powers are acquired by Europe they can never return to member states. I'd be happy to go along with sort of less than some people think is necessary if we could create that precedent and establish that every future treaty negotiation, there'll be a need for a lot as the Eurozone countries move towards creating a single state, which they've got to, because there's never been a single currency without a state to run it, equipped with all the powers of the state to tax, regulate, borrow, spend, transfer money within the Eurozone. They're on that path, they're going to need lots of treaties. We're not going to be part of that. We should make that clear, but say that every time they do have a treaty, we'll be wanting more powers back. If we could start on that process, I would support what the Prime Minister's doing.
But if we decide to stay within the EU, is there a danger that afterwards there will be discussions about an ever closer union, which...
Yes, I mean, we'll probably get that
be
phrase exempted, withdrawn from the treaty, or agreement that it will be removed or modified or said not to apply to the United Kingdom or something. But that's playing with words. That sometimes the European Court cites that far more often when it wants to move in an integrationist direction. The European Court cites the spirit of the treaties, and it will continue to cite the spirit of the treaties. So we're in danger, if we haven't sort of reversed one of the spirits of the treaties, of finding ourselves on an escalator towards a single state. And that's my fear. That's why unless he's very successful in achieving that change of direction as far as Britain's concerned, I think we'll have to leave. It's not such a big deal staying or leaving as people imagine. If we were staying with the status quo, but we won't be staying with the status quo, we'll be moving ahead. And leaving, that would have been a serious matter back in the 1970s, because then tariffs were very high and you would have been outside of tariff wall. Now the average tariff wall in Europe is 2%. That's smaller than a week's movement in the exchange rate. So it won't be perceptible to most industries.
And after a few months after the election, it seems already that your party is in chaos, mainly over the welfare, because there were some rebellions in the House from your own backbenchers. Why is that?
Well, you say chaos. There have been some rebellions or some disagreements. The interesting thing is every parliament since 1970 has been more rebellious than the previous one, if you measure it by the number of votes cast against the official party whips. And the last parliament was the most rebellious ever. This will probably be the most rebellious ever. Why? It's partly because members of parliament are much more under pressure from their constituents than used to be the case. When I was first elected, our government would do something with a controversial bit in it. I'd get organised lobby, a few people write to me saying, please vote against Clause X of the widget bill. I'd get the draft reply from the department and send it off to them and never hear anymore. Then the next sort of parliament or two, people started getting more questioning, and they'd write back and say, I don't agree with that letter you wrote. I'd look at it in more detail and think, oh dear, these people in central office can't write a proper reply. These are the arguments. I'd write back to them. Hear that book about Parliament War later. The invention of the internet. They'd start writing back, criticising my replies, brilliant though they were. And sometimes, when I looked at their criticisms of my arguments, I think they're right. I'm wrong. The government's wrong. and that's happening not just to me, but to 649 other members of Parliament, who are therefore more likely to find themselves voting against the government. On the whole, that's a good thing. It means that now governments actually have to convince people rather than just telling them it's party loyalty, you've got to vote for it. But if it goes too far, it becomes a bad thing because you then get weak government. So if every member of Parliament just sort of voted on every issue without a thought to having a coherent party line and policy, which involves compromises, as I had a compromise on the Maastricht Treaty, then you wouldn't.
That was
government
part
would be
of
possible.
collective responsibility, wasn't it?
Yes, but collective responsibility applies at a cabinet level, but a degree of party loyalty is important. You can't have. Edmund Burke, our greatest parliamentarian, said the essence of the British system is the party system. You have to have a degree of party loyalty, but equally you needed independent-minded people.
But this chaos, it's also because that you were not honest with your voters before the election. In your manifesto, you didn't say that where those cuts were coming from.
No government ever puts future budgets in a manifesto.
But UKIP did.
UKIP, what did they say?
They said that it's fully costed. The manifesto was fully
Oh,
costed.
yeah, fully. Everybody says their manifesto is fully costed. But that doesn't mean, a budget contains 100 measures. And you've got 5 budgets at least in a parliament. They're not a manifesto. Never have been, never will be. The only government party that ever tried to sort of publish a detailed budget was the Labour Party in 1992, and it lost. So that's you've certainly got to show the broad direction you're going, and the electorate would judge at the end of this parliament whether what we did was right and proper.
But apparently your 71 Conservative MPs will be affected and constituencies would be affected, so probably you would lose 71 MPs if there was an election in the foreseeable future. Are you concerned about it?
Well, I don't believe that 71 figure. No, the people at a general election choose between alternative governments. They give you the responsibility to govern. They know that some things you do will strike them on first glance as wrong. But they'll judge you not on first glance, but how those things have worked out over the Parliament and seem to be moving. We're confident that if we didn't reform welfare, things would go badly. We've got to make reforms. Those are inevitably controversial and sometimes even painful. We've tried to offset the pain by the national living wage and a whole lot of other changes on rents and child care and so on to try and ease the pain. But we hope that by the next Parliament people will say, yes, actually that was a sensible thing to do.
Andrew Mitchell was saying that the Chancellor should make some tweaks to his budget. Do you agree with it?
Well, Chancellors sometimes do find ways to tweak things to make them a bit better, but you can't just say some tweaks. If you've got a way that will not cost money or overall, find an alternative way of finding money, but make sure that the fewer people suffer any loss, then I'm sure he'll be interested to hear them. But tweaks in the abstract are not what he wants. It tweaks in the concrete.
But will this be the government's poll tax, which will bring the government down?
I don't understand it. It's most people are going to be better off.
There's really
including most
across the country.
Well, actually, all I've had is on the subject. Almost all the emails I've had and letters have been computer generated, by 38 degrees, people like that. I have had perhaps 3 letters from people who think they personally will be affected. That's all. Now, there will be more when it actually comes through, and then we'll have to see whether there are any real hard cases. I was on welfare reforms when I was doing it. I would obviously try and think beforehand and try and avoid any hard cases, but sometimes there were hard cases, particularly child support agencies, which I inherited, all the child support laws. I had to modify and tweak those, tweak them in major ways, once we found out how it was working in practice. So if there are difficult issues and he can resolve and minimise them, he will. But it's normal when a reform is being introduced for everybody to scaremonger and say, it's going to be the end of civilization as we know it.
But if people, they become worse off than they were before, what should the government do in return?
Well, it's trying to ensure that as few people as possible become worse off. It won't stop. There will be some, I'm sure, who will be worse off if their employers...
They will not have access to their benefits.
Well, quite, but they'll have higher living wage, they'll have...
But that's not enough to...
Well, over the Parliament it will.
In the long term, then?
Well, not that long a term, over the Parliament as a whole.
And my last question, on Charles Moore's new biography and Lady Thatcher, because you served her as Financial Secretary to the Treasury, Economic Secretary to the Treasury, and also Secretary of State for Trade and Industry. So what do you make, and did he interview you for his new book?
Oh, yes.
And what do you make of his new book?
Well, I haven't yet read it. He sent me a copy. It's
That's
there
why
on my
I
desk.
asked
I haven't even yet done what all members of Parliament do and look up ourselves in the index to see what he said about me, but I will. He's a personal friend of mine. He's a brilliant writer. He's also incredibly thorough. He phoned up on a number of occasions and went through things in great detail, cross-checking what other people had said and my perspective. A, I'm sure it will be extremely accurate. B, the bits I've heard on the radio, they've been serialising it, have been fascinating. And I shall look forward to reading it, but see it'll show up Mrs. Thatcher in a sympathetic but not uncritical light. I mean, he's not going to whitewash her if he... I'm scared.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yes, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure.